Welcome to the Compliance Officers Playbook podcast. You know, in our line of work, we often have this very specific, almost clinical view of fraud. We see it as a line item on a balance sheet. It's a cost of doing business. It's a control failure. It's, something the fraud department handles in the basement while the rest of the bank is trying to close deals. But I was reading a report from Cyberscoop this week that just completely shattered that perspective for me. They highlighted a statistic that is, well, frankly, it's terrifying. And it really frames the conversation we're going to have today. The illicit economy of fraud now rivals the GDP of G20 nations.
It is a staggering comparison, isn't it?
It is.
When you frame it against the GDP of major economic powers, we are talking about economies the size of Canada or Brazil or South Korea, you realize we've moved so far past the era of the lone hacker in a hoodie.
Or the small-time grifter.
Yeah, exactly. We are dealing with an industrialized, globalized economy. We're looking at an economic superpower, one that happens to be entirely criminal.
That sets the stage perfectly. We used to think of fraud as a nuisance. Now we have to look at it as a geopolitical force. And to really understand this, we have to look at a concept that the United Nations, the Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute, UNICRI, calls the gray zone.
The gray zone. It sounds like something out of a spy thriller, but it's the reality of the modern threat landscape.
It really does.
And historically, we had these very clear lanes. You had cyber criminals who wanted profit money in the bank, simple. And then you had cyber warriors or state actors who wanted geopolitical influence, espionage, disruption.
Two totally separate worlds.
Different motives, different masters. But in this gray zone, those worlds are converging. They're blurring together. We're seeing profit-driven crime syndicates that are protected by state actors or paramilitary groups. We're seeing criminal tools being used for state interests. It's a convergence of high-level corporate organization, military-grade technology, and transnational crime.
So today, we are going to navigate this gray zone. We're going to look specifically at the industrialization of pig butchering schemes in Southeast Asia, which is really the engine room of this whole fraud economy. We'll look at the technology driving it, from deepfakes to what they're calling crypto motorcades. And finally, we're going to look at the counterattack, the new DOJ strike forces, and this shift towards something called collective defense. Because if the criminals are organizing like G20 nations, we probably need a better defense than just filing a suspicious activity report and, hoping for the best.
Precisely. The scale of what we're facing requires a completely different mindset. It required us to stop thinking about compliance and start thinking about defense.
So let's unpack this pig butchering phenomenon. I've seen the headlines, and the term shadowy gets thrown around a lot in the industry press. But for the compliance officers listening who might just see the transaction flows but not the whole setup, what is actually happening here? Because this isn't just a standard scam.
No, it's not. Not even close. Pig butchering, or shadowy, is a metaphor that's as gruesome as it is accurate. The term comes from the idea of fattening a pig before slaughtering it.
Right.
In the context of fraud, it's a sophisticated, long-con social engineering attack. So unlike a phishing email that tries to get you to click a link immediately, or a prince in distress email asking for a quick wire, this is all about patience.
Right. They aren't asking for money on day one.
Not at all. They might not ask for money for months. The scammer builds a rapport, often a romantic relationship or a deep friendship with the victim over weeks. They share photos, they talk about their days, they discuss what they had for lunch. They build absolute trust. That is the fattening phase.
Building that connection.
Exactly. And once that trust is established, then they introduce an investment opportunity. Usually it's a fake crypto platform that looks incredibly professional. The victim invests a little, sees a profit, and is allowed to withdraw it.
And that's the psychological hook, isn't it? The withdrawal.
It's the whole game. It validates the platform. The victim thinks it works, it's real, I got my money back, plus 20%.
So it builds even more trust.
Exponentially more. Then the scammer encourages them to invest everything. Retirement funds, mortgages, loans from friends. That is the slaughter. Once the big money is in, the platform freezes, or tech support demands a massive tax payment to release the funds, which is just another way to steal a little bit more before they disappear.
And based on the reports from Debevoise and the UNODC, we aren't talking about some guy sending texts from his couch. These are, well, they're scripted operations.
It is highly corporate. These criminal groups operate out of massive compounds, particularly in Southeast Asia. They have scripts for every possible conversation scenario.
Seriously.
Oh, yeah. If the victim says they they are divorced, turn to page 4. If the victim says they like dogs, turn to page 7. They have psychological profiles of their targets. It's a psychological operation run with industrial efficiency.
Like a call center from hell.
With shifts, managers, quotas, it is a workplace.
And this brings us to the geography of it, which is where that gray zone concept really comes into play. The UNODC report highlights the Golden Triangle, that area where Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar meet. We used to associate that with drug trafficking, mostly heroin.
Right.
But now it seems to be the Silicon Valley of fraud.
That's a very apt comparison. The infrastructure there has pivoted from narcotics to cyber fraud. But here is the most shocking part, and the part that carries the heaviest human cost. The people sitting in those compounds, sending those texts to your grandmother or your CEO,
Yeah.
they are often victims themselves.
This is the human trafficking angle, right?
Yeah.
I think this is something many people miss. They assume the person on the other end is just a villain.
Yes, and the UNODC has documented this extensively. These compounds are often staffed by people who were lured there with promises of high-paying tech jobs, customer service, coding, translation work. They arrive in countries like Cambodia or Myanmar only to have their passports taken away. They're locked in these compounds and forced to work as scammers under threat of violence, starvation, or electric shocks.
My God.
They are prisoners. So, when a compliance officer sees a fraudulent transaction, on the other end of that wire is often a person with a gun to their head.
That adds a layer of moral complexity, that is.
Yeah.
Wow, that's hard to stomach. It's a double victimization.
It is.
The person losing the money is a victim, and the person stealing it is a victim.
Mm-hmm.
But these compounds, you can't just hide a facility housing thousands of people. Who is protecting them?
They aren't hidden. They are fortified. They're often visible on satellite imagery. The Davy Voice update and UNODC reports mention groups like the Border Guard Forces or BGFs and insurgent groups like the DKBA, the Democratic Karen Benevolent Army.
So paramilitary groups.
Armed paramilitary groups that control these special economic zones. They provide the physical security for the scam centers in exchange for a cut of the profits. This is why we say it links crime to national security. You have fraud funding armed insurgents.
So when we talk about the financial scale, we aren't just talking about lost savings. We are literally talking about funding armies.
Exactly. And the numbers are astronomical. The Davy Voice update noted that the new DOJ strike force has already seized $402 million in cryptocurrency from these networks.
And that's just what they've caught.
A drop in the ocean. The UNODC cited a case involving a company called Zun Yuan Technology in the Philippines. This wasn't just a scam center. Investigators found links to government website hacking.
Wait. So the same group doing the pig butchering was also hacking government sites?
That's what the evidence suggests. It just reinforces that gray zone concept. Once you have the infrastructure for massive cybercrime, the servers, the coders, the money laundering channels, you can pivot.
Right.
You can pivot between theft, espionage, and disruption. It's not just theft anymore. It's a massive wealth transfer from the West to transnational criminal organizations in Southeast Asia who are then using that wealth to destabilize the region and attack infrastructure.
That is a terrifying thought. It's not just, I lost my money. It's, I just funded a paramilitary group that is attacking my government.
Correct. It changes the stakes entirely.
Okay. Let's dig deeper into this gray zone corporate structure. You mentioned earlier that these groups operate like Fortune 500 companies. I really want to understand the business model. How do you scale a crime syndicate to rival a G20 GDP?
You do it the same way legitimate tech companies scale. You build a platform and you outsource. You lower the barrier to entry. The UNODC report details the rise of white labeling in the criminal world.
White labeling, like when a grocery store puts their brand on a cereal that's made by a big manufacturer.
Exactly like that. In the tech world, we call it SaaS software as a service. Here, it's callous crime as a service.
Crime as a service.
You can now buy a casino in a box or a scam in a box. You don't need to be a tech genius to run a pig butchering ring anymore. You just need capital. You go to a service provider, often referred to as an aggregator, and they sell you the software, the website templates, the customer management systems, and they even connect you to payment gateways.
So the barriers to entry for high-level fraud have basically just collapsed.
Completely. And these aggregators are incredibly sophisticated. One of the most fascinating examples from the UNODC report is the BG1 case. This was a criminal group that actually sponsored Premier League football teams.
Hold on. A criminal group sponsored a team in the English Premier League, the most watched sports league in the world.
Yes, they needed legitimacy. So they used a UK-registered entity, in this case, TGP Europe, to white label their operations. This allowed them to broadcast their brand on the jerseys of players, beaming their logo to millions of viewers worldwide.
So to the average fan, it looks like a legitimate betting company.
Of course, if they are on the jersey, they must be real. But in reality, it was funneling users into an illegal betting operation that was part of this transnational criminal network.
That is just, it's so bold. It's hiding in plain sight. It
Yeah.
really shows how these groups are mimicking legitimate corporate legitimacy to mask what they're doing.
And they are innovating technologically just as fast as they are marketing. We talked about cost crime as a service. Take malware, for instance. The UNODC report highlights tools like Craxis Rat and Gold Factory.
Gold Factory, I've read a bit about that. That's a banking Trojan, right?
It is, and a particularly nasty one. Gold Factory is designed to steal credentials, but it goes much further. It's built to bypass the specific security measures that banks use.
For example.
For example, it can intercept the SMS one-time password, the OTP that your bank sends you. It can overlay a fake login screen on top of your real banking app.
So you think you are logging into your bank.
You think you're logging into Chase or HSBC, but you are typing your password directly into Gold Factory's database. And again, the people using this don't write the code, they just subscribe to the service.
And I've been reading about deepfakes. This isn't just pre-recorded videos anymore, right? We're past that.
No, we are moving well past that. We are seeing voice swap technology. This allows for real-time deepfake audio. A scammer can be on the phone with a victim, and their voice is being modified in real time to sound like the victim's CEO or their grandson or a romantic partner.
That is a nightmare for verification. I mean, voice used to be a biometric we trusted. I spoke to him, I know it was him.
It's rapidly becoming obsolete as a standalone verification method. And they're combining this with App Store evasion. The UNODC pointed out malicious apps like Ace Pro and BigScan. These apps manage to bypass the security reviews of Apple and Google.
How? I thought the App Store review process was rigorous.
It is, but these groups are clever. They practice what we call versioning or dynamic loading. They might submit a harmless-looking app, maybe a calculator, a QR scanner, or a basic puzzle game to get approved. Apple checks the code, it's just a calculator. Approved.
Okay.
Then, once it's on the user's phone, the app downloads an update from a third-party server that contains the malicious payload.
So the Trojan horse is empty when it goes through the gates.
Exactly. Or they use enterprise certificates. These are special digital certificates Apple issues to large corporations so they can distribute internal apps to employees without using the public app store. Criminals buy these certificates on the black market. They send a victim a link to download their special trading platform. The phone sees the enterprise certificate, recognizes it as trusted, and allows the installation. It sideloads the malware right past all the App Store defenses.
So we have the scam, we have the tech, and we have the corporate structure. Okay, now let's follow the money. Because if they're stealing billions, they have to move billions. And you can't just walk into a bank with $1 billion in cash. You certainly can't deposit it without tripping every AML alarm in existence.
No, you need a laundry machine, and this is where the motorcade comes in.
A motorcade, like a presidential procession.
In a way, but for money. The UNODC describes motorcades as organized teams of money launderers. Think of them as a specialized logistics company. The scam compounds don't wash their own money. They aren't experts in the financial plumbing. They hire a motorcade. These teams charge a commission anywhere from 20% to 40% to wash the funds.
40%, that is a steep fee. In the legitimate world, you complain about a 2% transaction fee.
It is, but for the criminals, it's just the cost of doing business. If you steal $100 million, walking away with $60 million clean is a great deal.
I suppose, yeah.
It's better than getting caught with $100 million dirty. And the vehicle of choice for this motorcade is almost exclusively USDT or Tether, specifically on the Tron blockchain.
Why Tron? Why not Bitcoin? Everyone always talks about Bitcoin being the currency of crime.
That's a bit of a dated stereotype now. Bitcoin is relatively slow and it can be expensive to move. Chiron is incredibly fast, and the fees are negligible. We're talking fractions of a cent. When you are moving high volumes of small transactions, which pig butchering often involves initially to build trust, you need that efficiency. You can't pay $20 in fees to move $50.
Makes sense.
Plus, USDT provides price stability. The criminals aren't speculators, they are thieves. They don't want to lose 10% of their loot if the market dips while they are laundering it.
Okay, so money goes into crypto. It moves fast on Tron. But eventually it has to come out as fiat currency, right? You can't buy a mansion or pay a private army easily with just USDT. You need cash.
That's the off-ramping challenge. And for that, they rely on OTC brokers.
Over-the-counter brokers.
Right. In the legitimate world, OTC brokers help high-net-worth individuals trade large amounts of crypto without affecting the market price. But in the gray zone, there's a whole network of illicit OTC brokers who will trade crypto for cash without asking any questions. No KYC, no know your customer checks, nothing.
And TRM Labs had an interesting insight about nested services. Can you explain that? This seems like a critical point for the compliance officers listening.
This is a massive headache for compliance officers. Imagine a Russian nesting doll. You have a large, legitimate cryptocurrency exchange. Let's call it Exchange A. Exchange A does its KYC on a corporate client, maybe a small payment processor or a smaller regional exchange. That smaller entity is the master account. But inside that master account, that smaller entity is hosting hundreds of subaccounts for its own customers. Exchange A can't see who those subaccounts are.
So the criminals are hiding inside the subaccounts of a client that looks legitimate to the big exchange.
Precisely. The big exchange sees flow coming from payment processor X. They don't see that payment processor X is servicing a motorcade for a scam compound in Myanmar. It obscures the view of the bad actor. It effectively breaks the chain of visibility.
And this convergence of industries, casinos, banking, crypto, it seems like underground banking is the glue holding it all together.
It is. The UNODC report makes a strong point about the convergence of casinos and banking. Illegal online gambling platforms often double as underground banks. If you want to move capital out of China, for example, to evade capital controls, you might lose money in a rigged game on a gambling site. That money is taken by the house, which then pays it out to an account in another jurisdiction. The gambling is just the mechanism for the transfer. It's a remittance system disguised as a game.
It's ingenious in a terrible way. It turns the entire global financial system into a playground for these syndicates.
Which is why the mindset on the regulatory side is finally shifting. We can't fight this with the old tools.
Yes, let's talk about the response. Because for a long time, it felt like we were bringing a knife to a gunfight, or rather bringing a clipboard to a cyber war. But reading that Cyberspeed article, there's a real call to treat fraud not as a customer service issue, but as cyber warfare.
That is the critical shift. When you view fraud as a customer service issue, the goal is to reimburse the customer and close the ticket. It's damage control. When you view it as cyber warfare, the goal is to dismantle the enemy's infrastructure. And we are seeing that shift in the U.S. with the DOJ's new Scam Center Strike Force.
I saw that in the deepfakes update. It sounds like they're pulling out the big guns.
They are. This isn't just one agency. This is a collaboration between the DOJ, FBI, Secret Service, and Homeland Security. And their strategy is whole of ecosystem. They aren't just trying to arrest the low-level scammer sending the text, who, as we've discussed, is often a victim anyway. They are targeting the crypto platforms, the money launderers, the technology providers, the domain registrars, and the leadership.
And they are using sanctions, which feels like a significant escalation.
It's huge. OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, recently sanctioned the DKBA, that armed group we mentioned earlier that protects the compounds.
That is a fascinating connection. So the U.S. Treasury is using sanctions, a tool usually reserved for terrorists, drug kingpins, and rogue states against the people protecting fraud centers.
It explicitly elevates this issue to national security. It sends a message. If you provide physical protection for these scams, you are now a target of the United States government, just like a terrorist financier would be. It makes you radioactive to the global financial system.
But the government can't do it alone. The private sector sees the data first. The TRM Labs and IntelliSYS sources talk a lot about public-private partnerships, or PPPs. We've heard this buzzword for years. Everyone loves a good PPP in a PowerPoint deck, but what is different now?
The difference is speed and direction. In the past, PPP meant file a SAR and wait. It was a one-way street. The bank sent data to the government, and maybe 2 years later, they heard about an arrest.
That's not helpful.
No, that doesn't work when money moves in seconds. The new model is collective defense or collective intelligence.
TRM Labs mentioned the Beacon Network. How does that work?
The Beacon Network is a great example of this new approach. It's designed for real-time disruption. If a victim in Singapore reports a wallet address to their local police or exchange, that information shouldn't just stay in Singapore. Through a network like Beacon, that wallet is flagged instantly across the entire participating network. So if the scammer tries to move those funds to a U.S. exchange 5 minutes later, the U.S. exchange already knows.
And they can block it.
Block this transaction, it's stolen funds.
So it's creating a kind of herd immunity. Once one person identifies the virus, everyone gets the antibody immediately.
Exactly. It removes the time delay that criminals absolutely rely on. And Intel argues that this needs to go further. Banks, financial intelligence units, FIUs, and law enforcement need to share data proactively to disrupt networks, not just document crimes. We need to move from reporting to disrupting.
Map the networks before the money leaves.
That's the goal.
But there is a massive elephant in the room here, and the IGTRM paper highlights it. Jurisdiction.
The lawyer's nightmare. And the criminal's best friend.
Right. The victim is in the U.S. The evidence is in the cloud, maybe hosted in Europe. The perpetrator is in a safe haven in Southeast Asia. And the money is hopping through 5 different countries on the blockchain. Who arrests whom? Who has the right to seize the server?
That is the fundamental weakness of the current system. Cybercrime is borderless. Law enforcement is not. The criminals know this. They practice what's called jurisdictional arbitrage. They deliberately set up in jurisdictions where they know Western law enforcement has no reach. The IJTRM paper and Deepfakes both emphasize the need for harmonization of international laws. We need a standardized framework so that a warrant in one country can be acted upon in another without years of diplomatic red tape.
Until that harmonization happens, which might be a while, given the state of international politics, what can the listeners of this show do? If you are a compliance officer at a bank or a crypto exchange, you can't wait for a UN treaty. What are the practical steps you can take today?
Based on the recommendations from Deepfakes and TRM Labs, there are several concrete actions. First and foremost, proactive withdrawal controls. Yes, strategic friction. We spent the last decade trying to make payments instant and seamless. But for high-risk transactions, friction is a safety feature. If a customer, especially a vulnerable one, tries to send a large sum to a new wallet, delay it. A 24-hour or 48-hour cooling-off period can save millions of dollars. It breaks the urgency the scammer is trying to create.
It's interesting because usually the goal of tech is to remove friction. But here, friction allows the victim's brain to catch up.
Absolutely. Second is enhanced KYC with a focus on digital footprints. You shouldn't just be looking at the ID document to see if it's fake. You should be looking at the metadata.
What does that mean in practice?
Is this new account logging in from an IP address associated with a known scam cluster in Southeast Asia? Is the device fingerprint associated with other bad accounts?
So looking at the metadata, not just the data, verifying the machine, not just the human.
Correct. Third, behavioral red flags. Compliance teams need to tune their monitoring systems for specific typologies. Are we seeing high-value transfers to newly created wallets? Are we seeing rapid movement through mixer services designed to obscure the trail? Or peeling chains, where a large amount of crypto is broken down into tiny amounts to avoid detection?
Explain peeling chains for a second. That's a very visual term.
Imagine you have a large block of cheese. That's the stolen funds. Instead of moving the whole block, which is obvious, you keel off thin slices, one by one, sending them to different addresses.
So it looks like small, insignificant change.
Right. But if you do it fast enough, you move the whole block. Compliance systems need to be tuned to spot that rapid peeling action.
And finally, user education. But not just a brochure in the lobby that nobody reads.
No. Point of interaction education. Just-in-time warnings. If a user tries to send money to a flagged address or a smart contract that looks suspicious, flash a warning right there on the screen. Stop. This wallet has been reported for fraud. Are you sure you want to proceed? TRM Labs data shows that these just-in-time warnings can be very effective in breaking the spell of the social engineering.
It's about breaking that trust loop the scammer has built.
Yeah.
Why is my bank warning me? Maybe my friend isn't who they say they are.
Exactly. It plants a seed of doubt. And in a pig butchering scheme, that doubt is the only thing that saves the victim's life savings.
So let's bring this all back to the big picture.
Yeah.
We started with the idea that fraud is an economy.
And we are ending with the realization that it's a war. The gray zone means that the distinction between a criminal act and a national security threat has evaporated. We have fraud compounds protected by armies. We have stolen funds financing cyber attacks on governments. We have a convergence of human trafficking and financial crime.
It really redefines the role of the compliance officer. You aren't just checking boxes to avoid a fine from the regulator. You are, in a very real sense, on the front lines of a new kind of conflict.
You are. And as the criminals use AI, deepfakes, and automation to scale their attacks, the defense has to use AI-driven threat intelligence and real-time data sharing to keep up. You cannot fight a network with a silo. You have to fight a network with a network.
That is the key takeaway for me. You cannot fight a network with a silo. We have to share intelligence.
And here's a final provocative thought for everyone to mull over. We've established that this fraud is funding paramilitary groups and, in some cases, state-aligned hackers. If a compliance failure allows millions of dollars to flow to these groups, at what point does a compliance failure become a national security failure? If your bank facilitates the funding of a group that later hacks a government agency, are you just liable for a fine, or are you liable for aiding an adversary?
That is a heavy question, and one that I think will define the next decade of regulation. If the liability shifts from civil penalty to national security implications, the boardroom is going to pay a lot more attention to what happens in the compliance department. We are going to leave it there for today. This has been an eye-opening look into the industrial complex of fraud.
It's a complex world, but understanding it is the first step to defending against it.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening today. To my paid subscribers, I appreciate your support more than you know. And if you're listening on the free feed and want to support the show or get access to subscriber-only bonuses, just head to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to Compliance Officers Playbook podcast. I'll see you in the next episode.